In the traditional national income statistics world, which tries to capture the different kinds of economically relevant activity, there is a distinction between goods on the one hand and services on the other hand. And there are different definitions, but one way of defining goods is that they are material entities which can be sold and rented and so forth. So they survive the process of being created in a factory, for instance. And then services are processes which are such that they do not survive the provision of the service. So there's nothing left over. So this is an illustration. Industry, it produces goods, and then there are services, which are things like market services and so forth, social services, health services. And in some cases, we read about definitions of services as being activities which are economically relevant, where the production and the consumption coincide, at least temporarily, sometimes spatio-temporally. A nursing service doesn't create any kind of good which can be bought and sold. Its production and its consumption take place at the very same time. And similarly for these other examples, there's nothing left over which can count as a good. The first problem here is that goods themselves have economic value only because they can be bought and sold, and buying and selling are service-related activities. So when you buy a car, then you rely on the services of a car salesperson. And so the goods economy involves threads of the service economy. The consumption of the car sales service coincides with the production of the car sales service. So this is a pure service, as we will say. So there's the two economies are intertwined in all kinds of ways. So now we want to try a better account. There are certainly some pure services. And these are services which are activities, processes, occurrence in the BFO language. They are of economic significance, and they are such that production and consumption coincide. But now, what about health services or social services? The social worker may give you approval for food stamps, and the psychiatrist may give you a prescription for drugs. And this means that these are not pure services because there is some alienable lasting benefit. So it's like creating a good, namely the food stamps or the drugs. And many other cases of healthcare services, as we shall see, also produce goods. And these are goods in the strict economic sense. You can buy them, sell them, lend them, and so forth. Whether you can do that legally is another question. All right, now these are classical examples of services. And so the question is, are they pure services? Are they such that production and consumption coincide? Classically, they are presented as pure services. So I give you this short lecture, and then the lecture is over. You consumed the lecture simultaneously with my producing the lecture. But what we want to argue is that there is a further category of what we call pattern creating services. So your hairdresser creates a new pattern on your head. Your gardener creates a new pattern in your garden. Your professor creates a new pattern in your brain. Now, these patterns are not goods because they're not alienable, but they are such that they survive the activity which produced them. So they don't fit either into the pure service category or into the goods category, but they are economically salient. So there are service professions which deal entirely in creating patterns of this sort. And but once the patterns are created, then there are new types of services which deal with those created patterns. So they protect them, that's the bodyguard service. They repair them, that's car repair service. They restore them, that's the art restoration service. In each case, we have pattern-related services, which again fit neither into the classical goods versus pure services continuum. So this is our proposal. There are at least 4 types of pattern-related services. These are examples of pattern-related services in the professions area. The gardening is quite clear. So we have pattern creating services by a landscape architect, pattern protecting services, pattern therapeutic services, and so on. And car repair, we have creative car maintenance. This is an example of creative car maintenance. And we have protective car maintenance, which stores your car over the winter. We have preventive car maintenance, which gives you rust protection, and restorative car maintenance, where you restore an antique car to its original state. And then we have dentistry. We have created dental service, which is cosmetic dentistry. It gives you a new pattern in your jaw. And we have protective dentistry, preventive dentistry, which trains you how to brush properly, and restorative dentistry, which gives you fillings and bridges and implants and so on. And in medicine, we have cosmetic medicine, which creates a new pattern to your nose, for instance, or your lips. Then we have protective medicine, which builds a more resilient pattern in your body through diet and so forth. Therapeutic and restorative medicine, they're the more typical cases. And we have orthopedic cases, cosmetic surgery, cleft palate cure, and so forth. Splints, calcium regimens, and so forth, all within the 4 categories that I'm distinguishing. And then we have pattern-related social services. So the creative social worker provides advice, which creates new dispositions on the side of the client. The protective social worker reports your child to child protective services. The preventive social worker tries to prevent family-related problems which she foresees in the future. And the restorative social worker tries to restore the patterns which is seen in the past. And now we have some problem cases, bodyguard services, police services, and so on. So I think the bodyguard services are a combination of 3 kinds of services. The first part is the bodyguard just stands around looking tough in order to deter any possible threats. He is paid a retainer, which says that he receives money in advance to stand around under heading 1. And finally, occasionally, he provides intervention services when he actually protects you by beating up some enemy. And this happens rarely, but it's the payment for the bodyguard service will depend to a degree on the frequency with which intervention is necessary. And now military services, diplomatic services, they create spatial and maintain and restore and protect spatial patterns. So this is a picture of all the countries not invaded by Britain. I couldn't find any evidence that Britain invaded Brazil, but it seems that it's a blue country, so we must have invaded it. This is our work in creating and maintaining new spatial patterns over the centuries. And you can read about this in a much more detailed sense, and not talking about Brazil in this paper. And so now I'll summarize. So we're going beyond the goods service continuum. This is the traditional distinction between creating goods, which are alienable, and providing services, which are not alienable. So now we have 3 categories. We add the yields pattern category. So this is a service which is not a pure service. And then we realize that the yields pattern kind of service requires further service activities which belong to the pattern economy. In a way, we are introducing a new kind of economy, or rather, we are identifying a very old and very important kind of economy namely the pattern economy, which includes things like maintenance, restoration, and protection of patterns which you value in your garden, your car, your brain, and so forth. And I think I will stop there. I leave this slide just for interest's sake. I'll mention just the final criterion here, which was at the heart of the Dolce treatment of service. And I think the Dolce treatment of service, it provides much too much detail in its account of what is essential to a service. I think we need to start with simple and non-rococo definitions. However, I think that the basic idea that services involve a contract is not, it's not bad. So even the car sales service provider has a contract, not with the client, but with the employer. And I think if we are careful not to confuse those two kinds of contract, then we can build the idea of contract into the account of service that I've just provided.